Wenceslas. This is
Yep.
one of those Christmas songs that I've heard all my life, and I have no idea who this guy was or why anybody would write a song about him.
Well, you know, the first thing to note is that Good King Wenceslas is not actually a Christmas song.
Okay, great place to start. That's
Yeah.
my first misunderstanding has been ticked off.
So, yeah, it's interesting. The song actually talks about an incident that takes place on December 26th, which
I
is
see.
Boxing Day, and it's also called the Feast of Stevens.
Okay, and I remember that lyric from the song, something about the
that-
Feast of Stevens. Okay.
Yeah, so Boxing Day or the Feast of Stephen is it's traditional for the rich to take care of the poor on those days. They'll donate money or goods or other things to them. And I mean, it's kind of evolved into a day when a lot of people box up excess things that they own and take them to thrift shops or donate them, or just any number of things. It's not popular in the States, but where Boxing Day is huge, that's kind of where it's evolved from, is this idea of the Feast of Stephen. It's also the second day of Ankh.
Onk.
Anyway, we're not going to get into that because that's a whole nother thing. But
That's
anyway,
another podcast.
yeah, so the first thing to note is Good King Wenceslas is about a king. Actually, he's a duke.
Okay, so basically everything about this song is a lie, or at least everything I understood about it just is not true.
It's very hard to say what about this song actually occurred and what is just kind of made up,
Sure.
to kind of give us a good idea of what this guy was actually like. So, the Duke of Wenceslas was born around 903 AD. So he's a 10th century duke from Czechoslovakia,
And so
which was
Wenceslas,
Bohemia.
that was Bohemia at the time, and was Wenceslas then a province or city there, or was it just the name of his home, or was this his surname?
That's
or?
his last name.
I see. Okay.
Yep.
Whew, I know nothing about this.
Oh, well, actually, I think that's it. It's actually his first name. But yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
Wenceslas is his name, and he was a duke, and born 903 in in Bohemia. He actually went to college at Prague, which is in Bohemia. He was very well educated, and he had no desire to be a ruler at all. That wasn't what he was aspiring to be. His father was a Catholic, and he was very, very devout Christian. And he raised Wenceslas in the very traditional Christian manner, and so he was raised Catholic. And he loved everything about Catholicism, especially the aspects of giving to those who are in need.
Mm-hmm.
And, unfortunately, his mother was not on board with this idea, and this is what caused a lot of issues later on. So his mother was of a different faith. All that they say is that she was a pagan, but I mean, back in those times, anybody who was not Christian was considered pagan.
Right. It's basically, it could be everything else.
Yep. Everything else that was not like straight-laced, right to the letter Catholic was pagan. So,
Right. So, like, depending on who you're talking to, even like a different flavor of Catholicism could have been referred to as pagan.
exactly.
Yeah,
She might have
okay.
been kind of a reformed type of Christian, but we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so she and his younger brother were considered pagans, and they were not of this Christian belief. Anyway, his father died, and when his father died, there was a power struggle between Wenceslas and his younger brother. And it actually was to the point where it split Bohemia in two parts. Wenceslas ruling half of it with Catholic tradition, and his younger brother ruling the other half with pagan tradition, whatever
Whatever that
whatever
means.
that was.
Gotcha.
But Wenceslas's mother, she wanted to abolish everything Christian, well, Catholic specifically, in Bohemia. And as soon as her husband died, she removed a whole bunch of Catholics from power and replaced them with pagans.
Again, whatever that means, right?
Yeah, whatever that means. And it was Wenceslas's grandmother, his father's mother, who was worried about the pagan takeover, essentially, and the wiping out of Catholicism from Bohemia. So she told Wenceslas, "You need to stop this. It is your duty as a Christian. It is your duty to stop this from happening. You need to bring people to Christ. You need to take care of this." So that's when Wenceslas tried to take power from his mother, and that's what caused Bohemia to split into two.
Wow.
So
this song is rooted in something so much bigger than I had ever even imagined.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, and I mean, I mentioned before, Wenceslas had no desire to be in power. He actually wanted to be a monk. And he studied how to be a monk. And he was very good at taking care of the poor and the needy. And he was even noted to have visited dungeons and crypts to service the people that were in those places. So in the dungeons, he would go and basically sermon and give help to the people in the dungeons. And then he'd go down to the crypts and pay respects to the people who had died. And this was a very big deal to him. And he was very well known for being somebody who would take care of the needy.
Well, now this is perhaps partly influenced by the fact that we're currently in the midst of the COVID stuff, but I'm just imagining a 10th century crypt or dungeon and just thinking like, man, that's genuinely risky stuff there, and in terms of disease and things like that. That's not insignificant that he was willing to do that.
Yeah, it was a really big deal. And funny enough, he was so good, and there were so many stories told about how good of a leader, a ruler he was, that it even reached all the way to England. And that is where this huge idea of the really righteous king comes from.
Oh, so this kind of not to say he wasn't good, but this even more sort of mythologized version of Wenceslas is born in England then.
Yeah,
I see.
That, and it is in Czech too, because they loved him there too.
Gotcha.
But he was so good that it spread, like how good of a leader, a ruler do.
Right.
Anyway, so that's where we get this vision of the really good king. And it took off in England, and that's where a lot of these stories of the really good kings start coming from in England. And he was such a good king that a word of his deeds reached Rome, and the emperor of Rome at the time actually sent him a bunch of relics from saints. And back in these times,
what, like fingers and stuff?
Oh no. So different saints would have different items that were dear to them, and they were believed to have magical powers.
Gotcha.
And that was a relic. And the leader of the Roman Empire at the time was so impressed with Wenceslas that he sent him several relics from some saints, and so he essentially sent him magical powers.
And Wenceslas being so enthusiastic about Catholicism, this would have been pretty cool for him, I'd imagine.
Yep. So unfortunately, Wenceslas's mother was so concerned about his popularity and how good he was doing that she arranged to have his paternal grandmother murdered. She was the one, that initially encouraged Wenceslas to seize power,
right,
and to save the Catholic faith from being exterminated in Bohemia. But she caused the death of his paternal grandmother, and then on the 28th of September, and I didn't write the date down. He was 40 years old, about maybe 50. His mother convinced his younger brother to kill him.
Wow. So if we're feeling like there's a little too much drama at our own holiday parties, we could just sing a round of Good King Wenceslas and remember it could always be worse.
Yep. Well, basically he became a martyr as soon as that happened. And Bohemia, and especially Czechoslovakia, they celebrate Good King Wenceslas Day on September 28th every year, which is the day that he died.
Huh. I didn't even know he had his own day. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And he is the patron saint of Czechoslovakia. And he is known as the patron saint that takes care of the poor and the needy.
Interesting. So where this song is familiar, the song that's familiar to me, it has, Anglo origin. Do you know? Do you think is it
Actually,
something you hear people singing in Czechoslovakia on September 28th?
It has Czech origins.
Oh, does it? Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, so it was originally written. So it's funny. The song is plagiarized from an old Czech poem written by a Czech named Václav Aloy. I can't even say his name.
It sounds
I'll
fun,
just call
though.
him Václav.
Yeah.
So he wrote it in Czech, German, and Latin. It was written in the 13th century, this poem about Good King Wenceslas.
So we are talking a little while after Wenceslas's
Yes.
actual time.
So it's funny, after Wenceslas died, there were 4 biographies written about him, and those were spread far and wide. And you don't know exactly what all in them is true and what is not.
Sure, a bit of a Legend of King Arthur situation, I'd imagine.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, about the 13th century, there's actually a tune written. So the tune is actually Tempus Adest Floridum, which is a tune written about spring flowers when they bloom first after the frost is done. And so the tune itself is from the 13th century. That's not the lyrics, but the tune.
I feel like I can hear that in the tune. It sounds like that. It sounds like flowers blooming and stuff.
Yeah. So it was a 19th century Czech poet. So this is in the 1800s. So there was a 19th century Czech poet who initially wrote this poem about Good King Wenceslas. And like I said, he wrote it in German, Latin, and Czech. And it was published in a book. And it was in 1853 that this English hymn writer, who was actually famous for writing a bunch of hymns and Christmas tunes and transposing them from other languages, he got a hold of this this big poem that was written. This poem has like 13 stanzas, and he took that and used that to make this song about Good King Wenceslas. And he just fit it to the tune.
I see.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking the 5 or 6 verses of Good King Wenceslas that I usually see, like, that's a pretty long song. But he was working from like a Beowulf size tome of poetry and just kind of pulling and making it fit.
Yes, but all of the main features are there, and that's how we know that he plagiarized, or at least took so heavily from that poem that you may as well say he plagiarized from the original poem. So the poem includes a king who sees a poor person gathering wood and decides to help. He and his servant gather food, wine, and wood to take to the poor people who have gathered in the woods. The servant, like it's cold night, there's snow on the ground. The servant can't move any longer in the cold, and the king tells the servant to follow in his footsteps, and it will be easier to move along. And they make it to the poor people, and they celebrate with them. Those are very specific details, especially when it starts out when he's looking out on, it's the Feast of Stephen, he's looking out in the night, there's fresh snow on the ground, and there's a poor person gathering wood for a fire. And those are so specific in detail that it's so hard to say, well, no, he made this up himself.
Yeah, if we had some, what did you say? This guy was working in what, the 13th century? Did you say 18th century, 1800s? No, yeah, 1800s.
Yeah, 1800s.
So if we had a 19th century copyright lawyer on this, they'd definitely have a few proofs to bring before the judge at this point.
Yes. Yep, they absolutely, and it would be seen as plagiarism, like 100%. There's too many things that are the same going on.
Of course, he'd be like, "Hey, I work for a nonprofit. He'd be like, what would they call it? It's under fair use." He'd like find some way to try to weasel out of it, right?
Yep. It's so old, I can do whatever I want.
Right, something like that.
So, the interesting thing is that the story in the poem was written hundreds of years after good King Wenceslas was alive.
Mm-hmm.
It's not clear whether or not that story came from one of the biographies, but it's also hard to know if the biographies were accurate to what he actually did. But the heart of the story is there, the heart of who this person was, and it makes it so that it's plausible that something like this could have happened. So in that case, you could say that this is an accurate portrayal of King Wenceslas, which, by the way, after he was killed, he was named king. It was the Romans that ended up giving him that title posthumously.
Oh,
That
I
is
see.
why we call him King Wenceslas.
Oh, gotcha. All right.
Mm-hmm.
I got it. Well, I really like this a lot. I had never heard all of, or at least understood all of the lyrics until prepping for this episode, and reading through them was actually a lot of fun, but it becomes a lot more fun with all of this history that you've given to it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I love this kind of stuff, these stories that come down to us from so long ago. And, understanding that, like, in the modern use of the word true, maybe it's like factually perfectly accurate, but it may very well describe personal attributes, give an idea of who this guy was. And I'll be honest, until now, this song has been kind of one of those cheesy fringe Christmas tunes that I've never really been very into.
Oh, well.
And now suddenly I'm like way into this. I really like this now,
It's funny that you say that, because I actually I looked up the reactions of people at the time in 1853 to this song.
What were the hot takes?
They didn't, well, so the general public liked it, but the critics hated it.
Oh, sure, them critics.
They said that it was not Christian at all in any way, shape, or form. It was fluff. It was propaganda. It was expected to fade and die with history. They also said that it was just like they were incensed that he took that tune from the 13th century, put lyrics to it about a 10th century king, and then tried to sell it as like a new Christian tune.
So this is like this would be like if today we took like, oh, who knows, like Last Christmas I Gave You My Heart or something, and then also set it to the tune of like some sacred hymn, and then like released it on the radio, and like all the critics would be like, this is just fluff, this is ridiculous, this is what's wrong with consumerism, and this will never last. And then centuries later, it's still around.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's very fair to say that it is 100% the way that we react to songs that are created now that are being sold as Christmas songs, and we just say, I don't think so. That's not a traditional Christmas tune. And speaking of which, did you know that up until just recently, within the last 50, 75 years, Christmas hymns were not considered hymns and were not sung in churches?
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah, they were considered to be inappropriate for a nice, like, Christian setting. And it wasn't until people really started to read the lyrics and listen to the melodies. And like, you know what, these are really nice tunes. I think they can be sung in a church setting. And that's when they started to be sung in a church setting.
Ah, how interesting. That kind of tracks. Of course, I'm no historian. I don't know how exactly it would tie together. But when I was talking to Tim Cummings about Christmas carols, he mentioned that carol, even the word carol, comes from this idea of singing and dancing both at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I can imagine, just in this like sort of vague ethereal grasp that I have of history, which is very vague and very ethereal, but I can kind of imagine like a long time ago, a sort of, maybe you might say like more free or natural kind of, dancing is cool kind of religious movement existing, and then this sort of ratcheting down and tightening up of like what's permissible within the walls of a synagogue or church, coming closer to like what I understand to be like a sort of a Victorian England kind of sentiment of like what's appropriate and what is very inappropriate. One should never do this, one should always do that. And then so then at that point, like carols becoming like oh, music of the plebs, you know, this is like pop music, it's not sacred enough, and then kind of coming out of that again.
Yep.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe I should cut all of that out because that's just me being a wild speculator, really. I have no history.
No, you know, it's interesting that it used to be that, I mean, you know, pagans, a lot of times when they refer to pagans, it was anybody whose religious rituals included things like loud singing, dancing, drinking, making merry, you know, things like that. And then the Christians came in and were very subdued and calm and quiet, you know, and they just really wanted to be as still as possible, it seems. And so these traditions of being, you know, loud and boisterous and celebrating in a loud way, you know, they thought was offensive to the spirit of a god, you know. Whereas the ones that were singing and dancing and making loud, they felt like, no, that is the appropriate way to celebrate, you know, the amazingness of being alive and the amazingness of what, you know, their God had provided and given to them. So it's just different opinions and different viewpoints on what is appropriate and what is not. But yeah, eventually the idea of being loud was viewed as inappropriate.
In one way or another, whether it's via my mad speculations or just... It is fun, though, to imagine these kind of cultural worlds colliding, you know, like at what point these things come together and stuff.
Yeah, and Christmas carols 100% would have collided with religious things, if you think about it that way.
Yeah.
You know, if you go into a church and a Christmas carol is, you know, singing and dancing and being merry and being loud, yeah, like that's not going to go over well. So yeah, Wenceslas definitely was a king who existed. Do not mistake him for the three that followed. They were not the guy that the song is written about, and the way that we know that is because of the poem that was written about the original good King Wenceslas, that was written by the Czech, and you know, also the fact that soon after he died, he was seen as a saint and a martyr for Christ. And that is why they celebrate the 28th for him, and they don't celebrate any days for the Wenceslases that followed in the few hundred years after.
Gotcha. Record set straight.
That's right.
And let's dive in. Help me out with the pronunciation on this one too, though, Vera. I don't know. Is it Wassail or Wassail or something else entirely?
You know, that's also up for debate. It's an Old English word, and the pronunciation is most similar to Wassail. But I mean, nowadays we call it Wassail, Wassail, Wassail. I don't go with Wassail. So
yeah,
I
feel like
that
I'm not
sounds
going to
really
do
silly.
that one.
But yeah, I think Wassail is going to be the closest to the Old English that was originally being used.
Gotcha. And what is it?
So it's an Old English word that means good health to you, or be healthy. So it's just seen as a general wish of wellness upon the person who you are, giving the greeting to. And in a lot of ways, it's a greeting as well as a well wish. So, it's funny. This is another item that is not actually a Christmas thing.
How cool. Lay it on me. Give me some of this good info.
All right. So way back, we're talking like hundreds and hundreds, 1,000 years ago in England. This was before they were very Christian. They would have, their harvest season. And then in the middle of winter, right around winter solstice, they would have another celebration. And this, has roots back into the pagans that were around back then. And the pagans had huge celebrations around the solstice, especially winter solstice. And this is where Christmas originally comes from, is the celebration around winter solstice. And the Christians pulled a lot of ideas and a lot of elements from a bunch of other religions and beliefs and mashed them together to make the Christmas that we know now. But way back before that happened, in the winter solstice celebrations, one of the things that they would do is they would hold this really big party out in the fruit orchards, especially the apple orchards, and they would have this big festival. And they were being loud and obnoxious because they wanted to wake up the trees. And it was a way to drive away evil spirits. And that would guarantee a good cider apple crop for the following year. They believed that the dancing, the singing, the bells, the instrumentation, the banging of sticks, and the costumes would wake up the trees from their slumber and let them know that they are loved and appreciated. And that would help them also shake off any of the evil spirits that have managed to hang on to the sleeping trees.
I see. So there might have been then the next spring, the trees that bloom, it's like, yeah, we got through to those ones, but what if one of them has some form of rot or mildew? It's like, we didn't get the spirit off of that one. Darn it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, back then, before they understood the science of things, that is how they would explain the unexplainable. And that's why you had things like, these fall harvest celebrations where they would celebrate and thank gods for their bountiful harvest. Or if something went terribly wrong and they had a really bad harvest, they would find somebody in the community to blame for that really bad harvest. Well, you were a bad person. We're being punished for your badness. And then that person would oftentimes take the rap for everything bad going on, and oftentimes would end up losing their life.
Like this, it's got to be someone's fault, point sort of way of seeing things.
Yeah. They just were not capable. I guess they were capable. The science was not there yet to explain exactly what was going on with diseased trees and why diseases spread from one tree to the next, why a harvest is better one year versus the next year. It was just things that, was mysterious to them. And so the best way that they knew how to understand it was through, rituals and things. And if you did a ritual and something seemed to work, then they would latch onto it.
Yeah, shoot, let's do it again next year.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Yeah. And
then it becomes tradition. So what is Wassail, the drink? Now that we understand that, it's actually a wish of well-being. So where does this drink come into all this,
Yeah, that was throwing me off because I was like, man, I thought it was some sort of maybe kind of fruity drink. Can you just yell wassail or wassail anytime you drink anything?
Yeah, so essentially, when they were out there celebrating with the trees, it was cold, and they liked to have a hot drink with them. And oftentimes that hot drink would be a mulled cider or wine or mead, and the cider especially would be made from the apples from those trees. The cider apples were very important for making cider because back then it was not safe to drink water. That's something people always forget. People would drink drinks that had some alcohol in them because the alcohol made the drink sterile and safe to drink. That doesn't mean everybody was falling over drunk everywhere. There's always just enough alcohol in it to make it safe to drink. And water was not drunk very often at all. It was you would drink more beer and ciders than anything else in your lifetime this long ago. Anyway, so they would be drinking this nice mulled cider or a mead or a beer. And I mean, it was a big festival.
We say
so
nice. Odds are, like, to our modern palate, it probably didn't actually taste all that great, but probably.
You don't know.
Yeah, who knows, right? I don't know. It might have been delicious.
To them, it was probably amazing.
Yeah, probably one of the sweetest things they ever got to enjoy.
Because they didn't have Kool-Aid.
Right.
You know?
No Kool-Aid, no refined sugars. They were probably living on a bunch of tubers and potatoes most of the year. So,
So yeah, anything with any kind of sweetness to it, I'm sure, was just heavenly to them. But yeah, so and what do you do with a festival? You start to dress things up. And that's what they started doing to their drinks. So they started adding stuff to them, such as raisins and spices and other fruit drinks and things. You would have, like, some people would have different wines that they would mix together. But the main point of it was that it was a hot drink, and it had some alcohol in it. And so this also started spilling into the cities and the villages and the towns. And so you would have poor people going around doing small performances, if you will, for money, because the wealthy people oftentimes were more willing to give in the holiday season of Christmas versus other times of the year.
sure.
So, you've got this holiday coming up. You've got, a whole bunch of people celebrating and whatnot. And the wealthy have loosened their pocketbooks and are, willing to give money and things to the poor. So the poor figured this out. And next thing you know, you have people basically on every street corner singing and asking for money, going from house to house, asking for money, asking for things.
Well, this suddenly makes sense because there's that lyric in at least one of the Wassail songs, "Here we go a-wassailing."
Yep, here we go a-wassailing. And so it's funny, if you look at the lyrics, all of the lyrics to these tunes, there's a slew of lyrics first.
Yeah, and
but the old...
I didn't realize how many tunes there are that are based around wassail and wassailing.
Oh, yeah, there
are a lot. Yeah, I have the lyrics for one of the many wassail songs here. This is from Tim Cummings' collection, On This Day, Earth Shall Ring. And we will fade out of this section to the music of this tune, the arrangement that he has. But here are the lyrics for it. This is Cornish wassail. And insert your own preferred pronunciation of the word wassail in this tune. I'm just going to read it like that, wassail. So it says, "Now Christmas is coming and New Year begin. Pray open your door and let us come in. With our wassail, wassail, wassail. Joy come to our wassail, joy come to our jolly wassail." So you can definitely hear it there. Let us in. We're out in the cold. Good wishes to you, etc.
Yes. So in some of those old versions, you will see where they're first complimenting the master and the lady of the house and also the children. And then they're asking for anything that they have to spare, be it a cup of hot beer or to let them go stand for a bit by the hearth so that they can warm up a little bit, or food perhaps. And one of the lines in one of the songs essentially said, thanks for sharing your plentiful with us, and please think about poor us out in the cold, freezing, while you're enjoying your nice warm house with all of your things.
Wow. So this is like a really well put together, like pre-packaged panhandling script. It's
yes.
Like here, first you lead with compliments.
Yep.
You give a little dose of guilt. You point out, lucky you and poor me. And I feel like I'm seeing a direct connection to that line in "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." That
Exactly.
Suddenly they're like, "Now bring us some figgy pudding."
Yes.
I've always been like, that's so demanding. Like, what's the deal with that?
Yeah, it is that exact same thing. This is exactly where those things come from.
Interesting.
And the lyrics, they change over time because people figure out what works better, because after a while you're like, heard it.
Yeah. Got to shake it up a bit.
Doesn't work so well anymore.
That or the person who's out there doing the singing is like, I'm tired of Wassail. I want figgy pudding. I'm going to change the lyrics.
You know what? Enough of this Wassail stuff. So the thing to think about, though, with that Wassail is, because you had children doing this too, right? Mm-hmm. So the Wassail drink that they would have ready for these Christmas carolers that would come running around, it was a warm mulled cider drink. And oftentimes it would have orange slices, raisins, and a type of a bread that could be served with it, that they could sop up the drink with, almost like you would with soup and a roll nowadays.
Yeah.
Also, the wassail itself could be served in a very large or ornate communal cup, and they would pass it around. So it's not like they'd bring out a cup for everybody. They'd bring out this big, beautiful, usually made of silver, ornate communal cup, and then they would hand it over, and the people would sip out of it and pass it along. And it had just it had enough alcohol in it that would warm them up, and
make them feel warm.
you'll get the circulation back into their toes and their fingers. So yeah, that is the kind of the history. Now, as for like a recipe for wassail,
Yeah. Have you ever made it?
I have.
Tell me about that.
Okay, so there are as many recipes as there are lyrics to this tune.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because of the fact that it has evolved over time.
Oh yeah. It sounds like it's been around for a very long time. Plenty of time
Yes.
for people to experiment.
But if you want to do probably the closest that you can to what might have been served 1,000 years ago during these festivals, I think you have to start with an apple cider. Alcoholic or not, you can use either one that you would wish. Put that apple cider into a large pot and then add in some cinnamon. I like to do 1 or 2 sticks of cinnamon. Or you can do apple pie spice because that's got all the right spices in it. Or if you do cinnamon, add some nutmeg, and maybe some cloves in there if you really want. And
that's all the right stuff for a good seasonal aromatic experience for sure.
And I recommend using a pressed apple cider. Don't use an apple cider that comes from concentrate, please. That's not real stuff.
And that's
So
for anybody identifying, other than using the good old Ned Flanders. I don't remember what it was. It's like if it's cloudy and brown, you're in cider town. If it's sweet and clear, you got juicy there, Mister. I can't remember now what exactly he said, but yeah. Something like that.
Yeah, cider is typically a clouded color. And there is some excellent cider to be had here in Utah. And it's not alcoholic. You can get the non-alcoholic, and it's amazing. There's some that they sell at Rowley's Red Barn down South Utah County. You can also pick some up at Smith's. Treetop does a version
I've
of
got a bottle of that
apple
in the
cider.
fridge.
There you go. You got the good stuff.
We should check with Danny. I think Danny Lendell in the band. He's got his family's got some orchard land down there in what is that town, Genoa?
Oh, nice.
I wonder if they're contributing in any way to any of these ciders. They might be cherries. I'm not sure if they're apples actually. But.
The other thing to add to this, to just make it that much more special, add some pressed orange juice. Notice I said pressed. Don't get the concentrate.
Once again.
Add some orange juice, or you could add some cherry juice, because we're thinking about the wines that they had back then. But I like orange juice in this. And you heat it up, make sure that you stir it regularly, and then just serve it and enjoy. It's an amazing hot drink that I love. Like, I've been making it for years around Christmas time because I just think it's so good. And I mean, if you look online, there's lots of other things you can add to it. People like to put raisins in it.
Yeah, I like most foods. I'll be honest, just for me personally, raisins are like one of the only things that I'm like, why is this even around? I'd much rather have a grape. I don't understand why we had to do this to this poor grape.
Humiliated grape.
But what you described sounds delicious. I know that I've had wassail of some kind before, but I think it was basically hot Kool-Aid, which was like not super delicious.
No,
But
no.
what you're describing sounds pretty darn good.
Yeah, you know what? Give it a shot. And I like to do like 1 part of apple cider and then maybe 1/4 to 1/3 part orange juice. And you can absolutely play with the amounts. I mean, there is no set like this is wassail. This is the official real wassail, because over the years it has evolved so much. And, you know, it was everything from beer to wine to mead to cider way back when, you know, they were singing wassail.
So however we do it, it's probably authentic to some time period.
Unless you're using stuff from concentrate, then it's authentic to no time period.
Right. If it's hot Kool-Aid, then that's not quite it.
Yeah. But I highly recommend people give it a go.
Yeah, and I want to know if anybody tries this, especially if somebody pairs this with Jeff's shortbread recipe. It'd be so fun.
Oh, geez, yeah. And there's lots of recipes online. You don't have to do it in a pot on the stove. You can do it in a slow cooker. You can do it in an Instant Pot, if that's what you're into.
One more use for the Instant Pot.
I mean, you could probably put it in a Dutch oven and stick that in your oven if you really wanted to.
I'm going to smoke my wassail this year.
There you go. Just go stick it in the smoker outside and let it go. Anyway, yeah, wassail, what an incredible drink that's named after an Old English word that means good health to you.